Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software Great Tech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Peter Lehrer. He's a lifelong entrepreneur and co-founded Lehrer McGovern Inc., now Lend-Lease, in 1979. Peter has had a decorated career supporting private and public projects ranging from infrastructure to residential hospitals. His portfolio of work includes the restoration of the Statue of Liberty, the new Terminal 1 at JFK International Airport, the iconic 41 West 57th skyscraper, and the 15th Central Park West luxury condominium. Welcome to the show, Peter. Peter, how'd you get into this industry to begin with?
Well, first of all, I love the construction business and I always have. And I think from the time I realized I would not play center field for the Yankees, it's always been about construction. And when I was a little boy, I used to follow my father around construction projects. He was a small general contractor, and somehow all of this has become part of my DNA, and I've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. So looking back over your career, what are some of the maybe most significant changes you've seen happen throughout construction?
I mean, I think that that's a great question. And I think there is something that really hasn't changed in construction, and that's the human element of what it takes to get projects done successfully. Look, there's the old adage, on time, on budget, which are obviously super important, and then try and avoid lawsuits, disputes, and things that don't work. And I think that while technology has been complementary to the construction business, I think the human element, has not really changed, and that probably the uniqueness with the construction business is the lack of enough high-level people who know how to get stuff done.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you bring up on the human connection. One of the things that we talk about a lot is on the collaboration angle. How do you get people with different vantage points and all the different stakeholders involved in a construction project? How do you get them to the table early and often to kind of chat through all the different angles and goals and vantage points to get them communicating to create kind of the environment for a successful project? How have you seen the collaboration side of things change or evolve over the years?
Well, I think that COVID and email has definitely had a negative impact on this. I think that COVID, logically, because people couldn't come back into the office, and email, which has resulted in really the loss of people talking to each other, seeing each other. It's easy to send an email. It's much harder to sit across the table from somebody to try and work out an issue. Look, to be successful, the word that comes to mind is courage. You have to care about what you're doing. You have to understand what you're doing, and you have to be able to express your opinion. It's just too easy to let things just evolve, but you have to have the courage to intervene, express an opinion, to have passionate about what you're doing and what you think are the right answers.
I love it's too easy to let things evolve and to have the courage in expressing your opinion. How would you advise people to go about kind of building that muscle back again? Because I think, to your point, email has made it a lot easier just to fire off an email and maybe state your opinion, but maybe not in a productive way. How do you build that muscle to kind of
Yeah.
the thinking back on its head?
Yeah, I think that it, I think it's hard to train people to do this. I think people either intuitively the desire, the interest to do this, or they don't. It's too easy to just tell people what they want to hear, not, what they need to know. But I don't think there's a way to train people to do this. I have always felt I never wanted to be like everyone else. And it's not easy uh, because life has been more complicated. I've worked very hard. I've been very dedicated to what I do, but I've done it because that's just the way I'm made up.
Yeah. Any particular moments or projects that have kind of symbolized the journey or the evolution of construction in your mind that you've been a part of?
Well, I've been very fortunate because the goal in life has been to do the largest, most complicated projects that were out there. And certainly, probably my single favorite memorable project was the rebuilding the Statue of Liberty. And uh, my company at the time, which was Lehrer McGovern, we won that project having been in business only a couple years. And we find ourselves trusted with our country's most visible, important national monument, in which it needs to be fixed. But there's no methodology, there's no plan, there's no history on what it takes to fix a statue. Basically, everything that was done were things that had to be invented and in most cases never done before. So, for instance, the Parks Department, after the statue started to leak and water was penetrating the inside, they covered the inside with tar, basically. And it was just so incredibly ugly. They then painted it with government colored green paint. But in order to repair the statue, all of that had to come off. So we got the paint off by freezing it with liquid nitrogen, and we got the tar off using bicarbonate of soda, shooting ground up walnut shells, you know, is the final process to clean it and restore it to its original condition. But,
Uh-huh.
those are just a couple of examples. There's no place to go to find these answers. It just takes, a lot of persistence. I mean, part of my own philosophy is never to take no for an answer. You can't tell me something can't be done. There's always a way to do something.
Yeah. What was it like, really having to be very creative and innovative to think through a lot of complex problems with, a pretty high stakes, high pressure environment. You
Mhm.
mess up the Statue of Liberty, people
Mhm.
are going to know.
Well,
How did you think through that?
we would have been out of business if we screwed up the Statue of Liberty,
Yeah.
um, and that's what we thrived on because in our mind failure was never going to be an option. We just
Mhm.
had to figure it out, and we did.
What was the environment like as far as the culture and the mentality of everybody else on the team then? Because you would have to get the buy-in of, all right, let's go do this and let's be courageous, let's be bold, let's go
Mm.
test out things and figure it out and kind of adapt on the fly.
Well, it was incredibly complicated because the Department of Interior, the Park Service, basically is responsible for the statue. So we had to go work with a government entity that also had never done anything like this. And obviously, cautious, conservative people, we had to convince because we had a schedule. We knew when Reagan was going to be there to celebrate the reopening of the statue. So there was no option. It couldn't take longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. How did you go about identifying the right people to be involved in the project?
So a lot of the project was the restoration of the skin,
Mhm.
which is made of copper, and the thickness is about the thickness of a penny. And there's not a lot of copper work being done at this scale in the 1980s. So we went to Paris and we found French artisans who were used to working with copper, and we brought 10 of them to the United States. We set them up on Liberty Island in a shop. We found housing for them. Pretty sure initially none of them spoke English, uh, but we created an environment for them to do their craft.
Very cool. Very cool. So a lot has kind of changed and evolved in the industry over that time. How has the technology wave and curve in your mind impacted construction?
Well, I think that BIM, which has been a terrific tool in terms of creating three-dimensional coordination of mechanical systems, has been a very valuable tool, as opposed to, remember, draftsmen sitting over plans, drawing, every pipe and duct, and in order to make sure that things have clearance. So the technology of BIM has been very helpful. But there's, as I've said, there's another side of it. So that if you're looking at a set of plans and you're working, let's say, with a famous architect, and he has details that are very unique, most likely never done before. How do you, address that situation so that if you see something and you don't believe it'll work, to be able to say to the architect, I was thinking about this and I don't think that this detail, you know, is the best detail. And you have to convince them, obviously, that you're right and there's an alternative way of doing it. And that's something you don't look. I have a degree in civil engineering, but I didn't learn that in college.
Mm.
So there's no set of rules that you follow. It has to come from thinking about what you're doing and again, uh, being to address it.
Yeah, back to the courage of stating your opinion as well
Yeah.
too, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to kind of
Mm-hmm.
be bold and be out front about it, and then back it up. What's kept your passion for the construction industry?
There is no day is ever like the day that preceded it. Every day there's a new challenge, a new issue, a new mountain to climb in order to make a difference. So
Mm.
it's just kind of the the evolving process, changing process that I find, fascinating.
Yeah, looking back or looking forward, I should say, over the next kind of 10, maybe even 20 years, where do you see the arc of construction moving and kind of driving towards?
There's a couple things. The first thought that really comes to mind is risk. What is the contractual format for a project? And how risky is the project? And how do you contract for it? And can you really transfer the risk, to a contractor who doesn't want to take the risk and doesn't want to lose money?
Mm.
So I think that as we look to the future, and again, there's no simple way to say how to manage a project. Every project is different. So I think understanding risk and how to contract for it, will be a big component, going forward of the business. I think the being able to attract people into this industry. So if you're graduating college, do you want to be an investment banker or do you want to be a project manager, in construction? Well, you're going to make a lot more money as an investment banker, but we need to continue to get young people involved and interested. And unfortunately, this business up until probably the last 20 or 30 years has been an all male business that has excluded half our population. So it's important to be able to generate interest on the part of both men and women uh, to want to be part of construction.
Sure. How do you get more awareness and interest from people to really come into the industry? Because it's a huge hurdle that's facing the industry for sure, with the amount of retirements that are taking place in construction and not enough people interested in coming into this space. How do you get in front of women that may be like, no, construction's not for me? How do you start changing some of that stereotype and perception?
Well, I think having podcasts in which people have, a source and opinions available to them. I think a lot starts at colleges and universities at being able to talk to young people about the industry. I think there have been so many phenomenal projects, not only this century, but previous that have been done. And if the media perhaps spent a little bit more time talking about how the Eiffel Tower got built and what challenges did it have, or the Brooklyn Bridge, or how the Empire State Building was done in 13 months. So I think there's a lot of good stories which should inspire young people to want to carry on and be part of the legacy.
Yeah. What advice would you have for people that are, maybe just starting out in the industry or looking at coming into the?
I think that mentoring sort of comes to mind, but in order to mentor, you have to be able to reach people who are receptive to being mentored.
Looking back through into the crystal ball of the future, is there any particular trends that you're seeing coming into the space that you think have some momentum or something that we should keep our eye on?
Yeah, I think the issue of the supply chain, uh, I think for people to understand what are the critical components in buildings, where does the material come from, how long does it take to get it, you know, what are the issues? So I could sit in a meeting and say to a contractor, where is all the material coming from? And depending on that answer, may determine whether or not that contractor gets to work. Because there's probably no other industry where more things could go wrong than the construction industry. When you think about putting together a building that has to be built within, let's say, a half inch of tolerance, and it could be 50, 60, 70 stories. So there's a lot of things that could go wrong in buildings, and a lot of things that have made our construction lawyers very wealthy because things went wrong.
Yeah, I say all the time, construction, I think, has some of the best creative problem solvers around, because you have to. That's what every single day on the job site is getting a new problem that you haven't really faced before and figuring out how to overcome it and make it work.
So I have this, and I don't want to jinx myself, but in all the years I've been in the construction business, I have never been sued, nor have I ever sued a client or a contractor, which is a
It's a pretty
pretty
good record.
it's a yeah, it's a pretty amazing track record, and I plan to continue that.
Love that. What do you think was the secret behind all that? I mean, that's a crazy record, so well done.
Yeah, I think it's an ability to be able to communicate and understand different points of view, and to keep ego and emotion out of the decision-making process and just try and be practical and fair and to find just a way to solve things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. So as we start to kind of land the plane here, a couple of rapid fire questions for you. What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that kind of mean and bring up in your mind?
Modeling the future
Modeling the future.
is that, yeah. I think if it relates to what is the purpose of what you're doing and are you accomplishing that purpose in the most effective way? Look, you could take a university project and you could spend $1,000 a square foot, or you could spend $4,000 a square foot. If you spend $4,000 a square foot, it doesn't change what happens within the four walls when the building is done, but you've spent a lot of money along the way. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's, in terms of modeling, I mean, I think about it in terms of creating interesting, purposeful buildings, but doing it in a practical, economical way.
Yeah, love that. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation is about people and their ability to lead, to be creative, to be tough, to be persuasive, persistent.
I agree. How do people find out more information on what you're doing and be able to connect with you?
Well, I would like everyone to look at our website, which is pmlnyc.com. I'm also always very receptive, so it's not beyond me to talk to people who I don't know, and if I could try and help somebody and make a difference in their life, that's probably one of my greatest satisfactions.
That's awesome. Well, final question for you. If I could give you all power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the construction industry, what would you pick to innovate?
Well, I love the question. I mean, the thought that comes to mind is reputation, and
Mhm.
I think, and I don't know, and you could tell me if not, we'll go down a different path. But I think that people have to think always about their reputation and the legacy that they're leaving and the impact it has on others.
I think that's a great one. I think that clearly the reputation and the legacy aspect of it that you have built over your career is a huge hallmark of going back to the never been sued or never sued. I think that's a huge testament to uh, that legacy of being able to put ego aside and work and collaborate with a whole
Yeah.
host of different people.
So I could drive around New York with my daughters, and when they were young, I would say, "Well, you see that building?" And they said, "Yes, Daddy, I know you built it." But the thing that has really meant the most to me are relationships, people who I've gotten to know, people who have helped me, and there have been many, and people that I've helped and tried to change their life. And I once had an executive, and I said, "I want you to do this," and he said, "I can't do it. I don't I don't have. I'm not confident. I don't have the experience." I said, "Guess what? You're going to do it." And he did. So I like pushing. I push myself very hard, and I like pushing other people to do things that they don't think they could do.
Well, Peter, thanks so much for taking time to join the show and share your insights and advice. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the great questions. I look forward to whatever comes.